Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I apologize for the delay, but we are here and we are ready. If you can see and hear me, drop your location in the chat so I know that everything is working appropriately. Welcome back for another session. Hello, I see repeat names already. Welcome back, everyone. Hello from the Netherlands, California, Toronto. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to drop the links in the chat for you all now, and I will drop those intermittently throughout our session today with Ryan Douglas. It looks like you can see and hear me just fine. Welcome. We're just going to quickly go through the intro info, and then we will get right into Ryan's presentation. So your replays for today, we are uploading them as they process on the hub. You can find the hub link in the chat. You can find all of your replays, your session resources, everything there that you need within the schedule. If you click the drop down, you'll see the replays pop up there. They will also be posted to our community page on the event recording space by the end of the week. For joining us at this event, you do have automatic access to our early Black Friday sale. So you will get an email with that information in a couple of weeks, but if you do not receive anything by November 16th, please give us a shout and we'll be happy to help. That is our largest sale of the year. So if you're thinking of upgrading, it's a great time to do so because you can get 50% off yearly and lifetime plans for Premium and Premium Pro. If you would like to keep the horror writing conversation going, we'd love to have you over in our free online writers community. Joining is simple. You just log in with your Pro Writing Aid account information, and then you can join all of the spaces there, such as the event recording space, the live event chat, and we do have some fun upcoming things ahead. If you would be so kind as to share your feedback on how you liked the event, we would really appreciate it. You can use the type form link that's in the chat, and I'll drop it again shortly. But if you can tell us what you enjoyed, what you think we could improve upon, and what you'd like to see at a future event, that would really help us out with our event planning strategies. We have a brand new writing challenge coming up from November 4th through the 8th. It's free to join. It's called 5K in 5 days. This will be held within our community platform, and folks that are participating will be writing 5,000 words or more between November 4th through the 8th. We'll have live write-ins with members of the Pro Writing Aid staff who are also participating in the challenge. There will be daily teachings, writing discussions, chat forums. So you definitely don't want to miss that. The sign-up link is in the chat and on the hub. Reminders for our session today, please use the Q&A box if you have any questions for our speaker. If you have any questions about your account, you can reach us at hello@prowritingaid.com. If you would like to chat with fellow attendees today, please use the chat box for that. If you would like your messages to be visible by everyone, you'll want to select everyone in the drop-down menu beside two. By default, they do just come to the host and panelists. And all of the offers that we're talking about and special links from our speaker will also be on the hub for you. So I'm so excited to introduce our speaker, Ryan Douglas. Ryan Douglas is a YA horror author from Atlanta, Georgia. His debut novel, The Taking of Jake Livingston, was a #6 New York Times bestseller, an ALA Rainbow Book List pick, a Tor.com Young Adult Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Best Book pick, and a Black Caucus American Library Association Best of the Best Book List pick. His short stories appear in the YA horror anthologies Night of the Living Queers and All These Sunken Souls, and his work on media representation can be found in HuffPost, LGBTQ Nation, and the National Council of Teachers of English, among others. He received his BA in theater from Hofstra University and is currently based between Los Angeles and Atlanta. Welcome, Ryan. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
I will go ahead and let you take over.
Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm Ryan Douglas. I just have a quick little intro presentation, and then I'm gonna leave things kind of open for the discussion. So I'm just gonna just a minute ago. Let's see. Okay. So Hopefully everybody can see this here. I'm just gonna cover the basics of uh, pushing boundaries in YA horror and just pretty much outline the differences between YA and adult. So I've had most of my career in YA. I'm still, working on my first adult work, but I sold my book back in 2018. It took about 3 years to finally hit shelves, and since then I participated in several anthologies, and I'm currently working on another YA horror that's set to release in 2026. So I've been in the business about almost 10 years, um, and I'm just gonna basically cover a few things that are important to know for getting into the space and just like making I guess an important enough uh distinction for yourself to get recognition within it. So let's see. Here we go. Okay. So what are the goals of horror in general? So I love horror because you don't have to necessarily deal with the huge allegories that science fiction and fantasy deal with in terms of like big government and society. You don't have to, you can, but I like horror because the goals are primarily to scare, shock, and disturb. So you can have these really personal stakes and get into like the intimate traumas and fears of your main characters to create a tense atmosphere for the reader and to speak to primal fears and evoke dialogues about the concept of fear and to challenge the reader's comfort zone. So this is always what we want to see when we pick up a horror novel, just as a baseline, YA, adult, all of it. So what are the goals of YA fiction? Because this is an important um, measure to um, match also when you're writing YA horror. I just had a brain fart. So the goals of YA fiction are to represent the experiences of teen characters authentically, to explore concepts like self-discovery, coming of age, and the transition to adulthood, and to bring an emotional urgency to storytelling in a way that adult books don't always do, in addition to imparting guidance to young readers. Now, the last one, in my opinion, is the most optional. I think that there are frequent debates about what the responsibility really is when you're writing teen fiction. Is it to hold their hands through things? Is it to, give them a message? I think that's also a thing that we talk about, like in the larger scheme of literature. Like, is literature there to have a message? Is it there to have questions? But I think that because it is YA, going in just thinking like I'm going to write this just to scare people, just kind of like how you write adult, is probably the wrong idea. Um, just because it's so entrenched in coming of age and self-discovery and just like growing up. So we're going to get into why YA horror is important. YA horror is an important vehicle to explore trauma in teen lives and can be used to create allegories between monstrosities, fantastical and supernatural, and things that go bump in the night, and social realities. So, because current YA is filled with fluffy stories, YA horror is at a unique position to target hard realities unflinchingly and stand out in the market. We are having a pretty big moment in YA horror right now. The past few years, we've seen a lot of horror books sell in a more mainstream way. So I think that people are welcoming that in and feeling like they're ready because we had this big YA fantasy thing, I say from like 2016 to it's dying down. It's been dying down over the past few years. And it seems like horror is something that a lot of people are getting into. So horror and YA come together to capture human experience with a unique immediacy not found in other genres. I think what they both have in common is that immediacy, you want to feel the visceral emotions of the teen character when you're reading YA. It's not like super logical. It's very much like, how do I feel right now? It's very stream of consciousness. It gets into your like immediate struggles in the way that what I was talking about horror earlier, how it kind of is like more visceral than the science fiction and the fantasy, and that it's very close to home. It kind of reduces focus from that big like scope. Usually, cosmic horror, different thing, but usually it just reduces scale and gets into the personal stakes. Okay, so how does YA horror differ from adult horror? So, because of the ages of the character, there are inherent limits involved with how far you can go in terms of gore, violence, and sexuality. And I think that how far you do go depends on your editor. So, for example, my editor allowed me to get away with certain things that oftentimes a lot of writers are not able to get away with. And I think part of it was the timing that the book came out in. Part of it was the fact that I was a debut author, and we were trying to get that like real readership and come out strong. But it really depends on the publisher, depends on your editor. So YA horror is going to be more concerned with making use of the horror to outline common YA themes and impart messages to the reader, like we talked about before. And YA horror is more of a mainstream market in YA, whereas adult horror tends to release as more niche. And getting into the main topic of discussion, what does it mean to push boundaries in YA? So, readers of horror, even teen readers, expect for horror to go further than other genres in removing so called safe filters in your average book. Readers are expecting to experience the thrill of being disturbed. Pushing boundaries drives an important conversation about authors' responsibilities in representing life as is rather than shying away from realities. And pushing boundaries does not mean gratuitously invading the reader's safe space, triggering readers, or causing unnecessary harm. So I want to zero in kind of on that third point there because I think that's the most important distinction. Um, a lot of YA readers can be pretty sensitive about that in particular, so trigger warnings are very important to include. Um, I think that in adult books, a lot of the times with horror, like it's kind of like you're reading it and you're kind of expecting this kind of like right on, like balls to the wall kind of um, uh, no holds barred experience. And hold on, it says my connection is unstable, but I think it's okay. In YA, you just have to be like really cognizant of. I think that personally, I think that we infantilize teens a little bit too much today, and I think that they can handle more than what we say that they can handle. But I'm more so coming from the perspective of like hitting the market, I guess, like doing it in a way that is going to be the most productive. Because if I could just write books that were, completely everything that was in my head, I would do that too. But there are certain limitations regarding like being gratuitous about what you're writing that you kind of want to bring to like this concept of like, what is the point of this? How is this helpful? How is this nutritional? Um, which brings us into how do we reduce harm in YA while honoring the goals of the horror genre? So, this to me is about mastering the art of pulling back. What does a scene need to be functional and to get its point across? Pull it back when you feel it going to a gratuitous place, and especially in scenes regarding sexual violence. My perception of violence in general is that it is more normalized in YA due to the popularity of books like The Hunger Games. So the environment is more welcoming to violence and gore than it is to sexual content. Um, and I was talking about this piece here before. One of my favorite parts about reading adult horror books is seeing how far authors decide to go in portraying violence. But for the teen market, the point is more so disrupting the reader's comfort zone without doing anything that would result in lasting trauma for the reader because, as I said before, teens are still trying to figure things out and we want to keep our readership rather than scar them. Um, okay. Uh, Sorry. Okay. So, what creates scares in YA horror? And this is obviously up to everybody. Like, if you're, I'm working on a slasher right now, and some of this is also just like book to book. But typically, you want to focus on tension and atmosphere. These are your primary targets. Create the environment by playing to all five senses. I think this is just a general writing note that has to do with being very sensory about what you're writing and bringing the reader into an immersive experience. So, um, really inside of your body, this is especially good for body horror, but I create an environment that plays to all five senses. What does the character hear? Is there like a grandfather clock tickering? Are there whispers and chitters? Are there crickets? Is it, is there noise in the background? What does it taste like? What do they smell? What do they feel on their skin? I think that's a really good one. Like, how does it feel on your skin to be in a situation where you're feeling a lot of dread or an intense sense of fear? So just setting that is important because I think that's what you find a lot. We see a lot of haunted house stories in YA nowadays. We see a lot of just like rising tension, rising dread, which is a good note in general, but I think that it kind of brings it into that YA space more because you're not relying on gore and the jump scares and stuff like that. Um, so you want to tie in themes, like I said before, tie in themes related to identity and coming into oneself. Um, in Jake Livingston, for example, a lot of the fear comes from projections, and the projections come from Jake's waking reality. So it's very much tied to the social reality of his life rather than just being something that is there to scare. And that's what I mean about like adding nutrition to things and making it so that it's not just like, I'm just going to traumatize you and scare you. And on one hand, I think that giving teens the freedom to read things that are like that visceral and unlimited is something that I would like to advocate for more. I don't think that we are necessarily there just yet, so we still have to get to a place where we're getting those freedoms. Currently, I don't think that we're there. Um, and avoid horror that relies too much on shock value, grossing people out, or making people cringe. Um, okay, so I have a few questions. I think this might be my last slide. Um, so navigating challenges that come with YA horror writing. So my questions are, how far can you go? How much do we trust our audience? What do teams need? And what did you need as a team? So the reason I put the last two there is because we often see a lot of conversations about writing the books that we had when we were younger in YA. And I think that, you know, yes, like we want to write the books that we didn't have when we were younger, and we always want to start with writing books for our former selves because we're writing ourselves into the shelves, especially if you are a writer of color, if you're marginalized in some way, you want to put yourself in the story in the way that horror, which is historically a genre that has not had a lot of diversity, but is having a lot more now, needs. So, but the distinction between what do teens need now and what did we need as a teen is very important, in my opinion, for YA, because I was a teen, maybe like 12 years ago. And some of the atmosphere and the landscape and the political realities that I was facing at that time are not what teens are facing today. I think that 2020 marked a shift for the just like changes in realities. And it's important to really create that separation, in my opinion, when writing YA between what teens actually need now versus what we needed as a teen. Um, Going back up to how much do we trust our audience, I think this is up to each person. Like, for me, when I'm writing books for teenagers, I don't necessarily feel a need to dumb things down. I don't necessarily feel a need to pull back unless I feel like it's going to be like super traumatizing, like I was talking about before. Um, I choose to trust my audience enough to know that they're able to handle the themes that I bring in. Jake Livingston deals with some really heavy things like mental health, trauma, suicidal ideation specifically. It does deal with a little sexual assault, domestic violence. Like there's a lot of stuff in there. Um, and I think that it is up to the author to decide how much you're going to trust your reader with these complicated themes. And at every step of the way, and we can talk about this more in the Q&A if we want to get more into like how these things go through the pipeline. But at every step of the process, if you want to fight for something, you should be prepared to fight for it regarding putting in realities that you feel the need as a writer to speak to. And when you get to that point where you're, pushing things to agents and trying to like negotiate things. There's a lot of people that are going to come. If you are shooting for traditional publishing, there's a lot of people that come in and say, well, you can't do this and you should do it this way. You have to be really ready to fight for what you want to see happen in the book, especially with horror where there's like just a lot of ways to I guess I don't want to say go wrong, but it there's a reason, I guess, why a lot of YA is very benign. It's just not scary. It's just not because there's a lot of people who are not honoring the conventions that I talked about earlier about horror itself and are more leaning into YA. And I think it is up to the authors when we come into this space to actually say, well, this is what I want to do. Like, I want to do horror. I want it to be scary. I want it to have conventions that are true to horror, and I want to trust my audience. And I think a lot of the more um, risky horror writers are currently having that debate with our teams or the people that we're pitching to. And yeah, I think that horror writers in general on the front lines of this movement have to be more adamant about pushing boundaries. So that's why I came up with this topic because I think it's an important one to discuss and to kind of push the dial forward in terms of what we are allowed to say and do and how YA horror is kind of mainstreamed alongside adult horror in the sense that it doesn't have to be so YA, like it can lean more into horror. So that is my opinion. I think that that is why my book took off in a way that it did because it was more interested in saying, what can we do rather than what has been done before. So that's my general take on pushing boundaries. I think it's very important. And this is my last slide. So um, if anyone wants to ask any questions or have a discussion, I'm open to that at this point. Okay, I see two questions, so I guess I can go ahead and answer those. Let's see. Um, I don't know if okay, so I'm just gonna read this, I guess. I thought it would appear, but I don't think it would.
Hi, Ryan. Do you want me to read the questions for you?
Um, sure.
Okay,
I thought it was gonna appear, but it didn't. So.
that's okay. Chandra is asking, Ryan, I'm very interested to know your writing process for your YA novel and how many rejections you got before your manuscript got published.
Um, oh, that's so. So with the taking of Jake Livingston, that one was the one that happened to move pretty quickly through the pipeline. Because I'd already gotten rejected for three other books. So that one, when I wrote that one, it only got like, I would say like maybe 10 rejections from agents, but I've gotten like hundreds, over 300 rejections from agents for other projects. Um, the process for it, so I've spoken about this before in other talks, but I started writing it when I was in a creative writing class, like sophomore year of college, and I wrote a little short story about like someone's body being invaded. I'd never written horror like that before, but I wrote a little short about someone being stalked by a ghost and having their body snatched. And someone wrote on it like, "We want to see. You should do this as a whole book. This would be a great book." So I just built it out from there. In terms of the process, it was like a process of trying to pay homage to a lot of horror that I read growing up and just kind of like honoring my experience with things that scared me. So it became very personal, and I think that's probably why the market responded to it because it was very close to home for me. Um,
It looks like Brandy
okay.
has a follow-up to that question. She says, what do you think was the difference between your previous rejected material and your one that made the sale?
Um, so I definitely think that the turning point was finding my style, just finding my unique way of storytelling. Beforehand, I was doing too much mimicry. I was just trying to be somebody that I wasn't. I was trying to mimic like so I grew up on Rick Riordan and I read Harry Potter and I read like what's it called? A lot of Neil Shusterman's work. So I was kind of trying to be like them. And I think that's just to me that is indicative of a lack of maturity as a writer, like when you're trying to imitate rather than just like be your own person with it. So once I started to really honor my own voice and my unique style, I feel like that's how Jake Livingston came to be. And um yeah, it felt close to home. You could really feel my beating heart in it. And I think that's important. Like you have to start writing things that feel really close to you and don't be afraid, to go there because people really need that honesty and authenticity.
Emily asks, how do you know how much is too much in terms of things like gore and YA? Would it be more accepted to have kills or attacks off page and describe the aftermath? How much do you tone the description flow? Or sorry, description down?
Mm. Um, I don't think that kills should happen off of the page. Personally, that's just my opinion. I mean, they can and they can't. So I think that I definitely think it's up to each person. Like I don't think that it's a broad brush. I think, like I said earlier, we want it to be where it's creepy and disturbing without being something that makes people like put the book down, I guess. And it's hard to gauge that. Like it's hard to explain kind of what the limitations are there without like invading someone's personal autonomy when it comes to the gore. But I think with stuff like that too, you know, the best thing to do, in my opinion, is to just write whatever you want and feel like think about yourself as a teenager, think about your like young people in your life, think about how you feel about like having teen characters die on the page. If that is something that you want to portray, portray that because at the end of the day, it's probably better to go too far because you're sending it to a lot of people who are going to have opinions anyway. And they're going to be able to tell you, okay, this is too far, this is that. Because I'm not an agent, I'm not an editor. I tend to do things, I tend to push things further as a start and then pull back later. So that's my general advice because it's really hard to know sometimes.
Sorry, I was muted.
Uh,
Carlton
yeah.
asks, how much does race play a part in pushing boundaries, in choice of character, and in discussions of race?
Um, So that's an interesting question because I often feel like there are certain experiences that Black youths have that might, well, not in general, but depending on where you come from, that might be a little bit rougher around the edges than the experiences that more privileged characters from more privileged economic backgrounds or racial backgrounds will have. Um, How much does race play a part in pushing boundaries and choice of character? Mm, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand that piece of the question. Um, in discussions of race, though, it's definitely like I said. I think certain people from certain backgrounds tend to have more rough experiences, and I think that's how you can kind of get away with it is by saying that this is what happens. Everybody who deals with something has a right to write about what they're dealing with. If teens are dealing with these things, like, you can represent it. We have to, as authors, I think we have an responsibility to tell the truth. So, yeah, like if I see something in my life that I'm like, this is something that represented me having to grow up too early, I'm going to put it down, even if it's something that isn't necessarily welcomed readily. So just be prepared to like advocate for the experiences that you have.
Gary asks, if a main character is a teen but most others are adults, does that automatically make it YA?
Um, no, I've read books with teen characters that are adult. I think it really depends on a variety of things. I think the storytelling method is important as well. Like I was speaking about the emotional immediacy and the urgency of the storytelling earlier. That's something that we find in YA a lot. The themes are the biggest thing. I would say, like, is your story about the teen character coming of age? Is it a story of self-discovery and like realizing your place in the world? I think that is a big YA thing. So it's very entrenched in the story. It's not just that the main character is a teen. I think YA has a lot of conventions that separate it from adult. So I think you can have an adult book with a teen character.
In terms of characters, could you maybe touch on for folks here who would like to write YA, but they're not sure how to make their teen characters feel authentic as they are not themselves teenagers, what kind of advice would you give pertaining to that? How do you make your teen characters feel authentic, even though, like you said, it's been 12 years or so since you were yourself a teenager?
Mm. Um, I think for me, it's this kind of like combining of remembering how I was as a teen, and the stuff that I was thinking about and the way that I spoke to my friends, and just being observant. I mean, we can observe how teens are, Gen Z, Gen A, act without, because they're all around us all the time, online and in life and media, we can kind of observe that and be, um, just be aware and be observant in a way that is, because I think that a lot of people are writing books that have really like stilted dialogue, and it doesn't feel like the way that teens speak, because the market actually is now aiming books at people who are way older. Like, and that I think it's because people in publishing, like you have a lot of older people buying these books, and they're kind of catering to their own sensibilities rather than thinking like this is for teens of today. So I definitely think like really just tune into the way that people think, tune into the problems that teens are going through today. Try to capture it in a way that kind of allows yourself to get out of the way and to just like give them center stage. Like don't try to force yourself too much into it, because I think that's when it becomes a little self-indulgent and like weird.
Karen asks, what other writers would you recommend for us to read in this genre to assist in our development as a horror writer for YA?
Ooh, let's see. I would say, hmm, one second. Um, I don't know why I'm like, okay, so I would say Andrew Joseph White is good to read. Let me think. So I actually, it's hard because I don't have I don't read like too much YA horror. Tiffany Jackson is good. Hmm. So for me, I'm gonna be honest, like I'll read YA that's just kind of like straight up YA, and then I'll read like adult horror books, and then I'll kind of go from there. Like I don't actually read a lot of YA horror, and the reason I don't is because what you're reading, in my opinion, really does affect the the way that you write. And like I said, I do find a lot of YA horror, which is why I'm doing this talk. I do find a lot of YA horror like overly benign and overly watered down. So it kind of makes me feel like I can't do things. And you can. You can push boundaries, you can do things, but I don't read too much YA horror for that reason. I can give you adult names, like I really like Nick Cutter as a writer. Um, I hmm There's a book called Sparrow Rock by Nate Kenyon. That's a really good book if you like um it's not YA, but it's younger characters. I think the main character is like 20. So it kind of gives that like sweet spot between like being too like teen and like just too watered down and not being like super um adult. So Nate Kenyon is good. Um I think Neil Shusterman, he's not necessarily like a straight up horror writer, but he has a lot of books like Scythe, for example, very dark thematically. So if you can go through, he has a lot of books. So you can go through his catalog and just like find the ones that are darker. I think he does a really good job of hitting that sweet spot without going too far. So I think there was a few names.
In terms of marketing for a YA audience, how would you say that, platforms like TikTok have affected your marketing strategy and your book sales with The Taking of Jake Livingston and other works that you've done?
It's funny because I actually don't have a TikTok account, and the one time I was on TikTok, it was on someone else's account during my promo cycle, and the real I don't know, it's not a real, I guess it's a TikTok. The TikTok went viral, so that was my first experience and probably my only experience with it. Um, I know that there are a lot of authors who use that and who are very effective in using that. Like I have personally known New York Times best-selling authors who got there just by making TikToks and promoting their books that way. Personally, for me, TikTok is like where the light does not touch. I just don't have a good relationship with that. I'm not a big social media person, so I don't have personally a relationship with using that channel as promo, but I know that it can be effective. So if you're comfortable with it, I think definitely it's an avenue. There's a lot of avenues though. If you're not comfortable with it, you don't have to do it. I totally reject it. There were a lot of requests for me to make little TikToks and do like there's the ones where you like have your book and you drop it and the other author catches it and they're like all of the cute stuff and I just could not. It just wasn't for me. So it works, but it's not for everyone.
Well, that's interesting. So you can be a successful YA author and not necessarily be active on a platform like TikTok if you're not comfortable with it. So that's good to know. But Book
Yeah,
Talk
for sure.
did kind of embrace your book, though. Did you see kind of a boost in sales just from the TikTok conversation on Book Talk surrounding The Taking of Jake Livingston?
For sure. Like it's hard for me to measure it just because TikTok is so like outside of my realm of awareness, but people were sending me a lot of things from there. So it was great. Like I remember there was one influencer who did a bunch of videos and it got a lot of traction. So yeah, like definitely TikTokers, book talk is a good way to promote. Um, if they like for readers, like not for me as the author, but for readers, yeah, for sure.
We have an anonymous question. Since you don't read much YA horror, how do you navigate your comps when submitting a manuscript? I'm new to the genre and as a writer overall and haven't read much at all either.
So I'm just gonna be honest. Sometimes I will comp things that I haven't necessarily even read just because I know how they fit into the market. Um, I was I'm still trying to get this one done, this one sold. It's a horror fantasy that I'm comping to a book that I haven't read just because I know that the themes are similar. And I think with stuff like that, like for example, with Jake Livingston, they said it was I think they said it was like Jordan Peele meets Danielle Vega, and I had never read a Danielle. I didn't even know who Danielle Vega was. So a lot of the time with marketing, you can just really just see how something strikes the market, read the summary, and just go from there. It's not necessarily, in my opinion, it's not necessarily like, is this book front to back something that is like similar? Because my book is nothing like Get Out, right? Get Out was the primary comp for the book just because it's black horror, but intrinsically or like internally in terms of plot and like everything, nothing is similar to Get Out. So it's really just about like what is it? Like what's the vibes? Like how do you get people interested in the type of book that it is rather than so you have to be aware of the market, but you don't have to necessarily read the books, in my opinion.
Have you noticed a broader space in opening for amplifying Black horror since, movies like Get Out have taken reins in popular culture?
Yeah, I definitely think Get Out was a huge turning point for Black horror in like all areas in terms of like film, YA, adult fiction, um, because that movie was just so well done and it had such an accessible concept and it was something that a lot of people could really get into and enjoy. And I think with Black horror, a lot of the buyers and publishing want to say that it's really niche. And I think Get Out kind of like bridged that gap where it was something that was speaking to social realities and was something that could resonate with Black audience, but was also something that could resonate generally with horror audiences and people who don't do horror. So I think that was like the real sweet spot. And a lot of people have just been piggybacking off of that for sure. So
Yes,
yeah.
definitely. We have answered all of our questions. Oh, wait, one more just came in. Chandra says, thank you for responding to my question earlier. My last question is, do you have any tips or tricks in pitching your manuscript or query to the literary agents?
Yeah. Ooh, the query trenches are just, I've been in the query trenches. So I'm on agent number 4. So I've been in the query trenches many times and it is, I feel the pain of that, even having books out, every time I query, it feels like I'm back at square one. I think that you should probably do very thorough research. Make sure that who you're submitting to is someone who really is going to like resonate with what you're doing. When you're writing a query letter, start the query with just like, you don't have to go in saying like, hey, this is who I am and this is all about me. Like, don't, that's, I'm just speaking from my experience. I have gotten agents by just saying, hi, I'm seeking representation for this 75,000 word novel. Um, that is this thing meets this thing, and then go right into the little summary of it. You know, 17-year-old such and such is blah, blah, blah. These are the circumstances of this person's life. But when such and such a thing happens, they have to switch this they have to switch their approach in some way to fix this problem. And then you complicate it from there. And then you have to put the stakes like at the end. And it's like, if this character is not able to do this thing, then this is the consequence. And then the final piece for me is like, um, usually I'll do like, this book is such and such meets such and such, and it deals with themes of identity and complex blah 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 and blah blah blah. And you can say like who it might be for as well. Um, but yeah, just like man, like querying is hard. Just stay patient. That just know that there's a bunch of agents out there. There's so many agencies, so just like keep going, keep going.
Cody asks, what was your favorite book to write, either most enjoyable, character relation, or challenges? Thanks again for your great talk.
My favorite book to write. Actually, my favorite book to write is not out yet. It comes out next year. Yeah. I will say though that just because Jake Livingston is the primary topic of discussion, one of my favorite challenges of that book, which I don't know if this is gonna sound weird, oh well, was trying to get into the mind of a murderer and understand why they think the way that they do. And so I did a lot of research on what um, what oh sorry, I just saw in the chat someone recommended a bunch of horror authors, so I really appreciate that. I love Adam Caesar too. I don't know why I forgot him, but yeah, I just really like that like really dark stuff, like trying to get into like the headspace of people that we think of as monsters and try to figure out like what is driving these people. You know, how do we relate to them? How do we differ from them? I just love the dark research, the true crime, all that stuff.
Can you tell us anything about the project you're currently working on? What are you allowed to kind of sneak peek to us?
Okay, so there's two things that I'm working on. The one is coming out next year. That one is actually a historical thriller. It's like a don't like a heist book. So Nick and Jay like stage a hold on. My internet connection keeps saying it's unstable. Nick and Jay like stage a heist to rob like this rich guy in Harlem. So it's kind of like just a spin on the Great Gatsby. But I'm also working on another one that's unannounced that's coming out in 2026, which is another YA horror. And it is a again not announced, so shush. It's a Willy Wonka horror retelling. So it's about a girl who enters into a competition with influencers to boost her brand and take her family out of poverty. But the guy running the competition is like this crazy washed up director who like starts murdering them one by one. So that one's really fun, and that's what I'm drafting right now.
That sounds fantastic.
Uh, thank you.
We have another anonymous question. Do you think that time periods would affect what boundaries can be set? For example, YA horror set in 1950 or even 1880?
Mm, I really like really gruesome horror from the past. Like I think it's just I don't know. There's something about that. Like I feel like we access these time periods through this like polish sometimes that I love when we see like just like nah they were going through it, you know. I don't know if I'm the person to really answer that one because I've never tried writing YA horror necessarily. Well, that's not true. I have tried. I've not succeeded. So um but I also think that like if you're doing something in the 1800s though, like literally things were rougher. Like things were just when we didn't have all this stuff that we have, things were rougher. So if I were to pick up a book that was in that time period, I would expect to see some like crazy shit personally, and I would be kind of disappointed if I was picking up something like I feel like werewolf stories especially go really well in the 1800s. Or if you're doing like 1950s and it's horror, I mean, I would think of like just like racial unrest and the realities of that because like human life is very gruesome. So I would say yeah, like just go for it. That's my opinion.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Ryan, for being here with us. The links are on the hub now, and this replay will be on the hub as soon as it's done processing. So thank you for being here and answering all of our questions. And thank you to everybody who attended today. And we will see you in about an hour for our next session. All
Thank
right.
you, everyone. It was a great talk.
Bye, everyone.